WBAI's Andrea Sears. New York City Department of Parks has created new rules for street artists to display and sell art in city parks. What the rules do is severely limit the number of artists that can set up in any one park. Robert Lederman is the president of Artist, who represents New York street artists, and tells WBAI Evening News in this interview he thinks the rules are a policy to privatize city parks and limit creative expression, and he finds it incongruous with the mayor of New York priding himself as an art patron.
For the past 16 years, the Parks Department's been trying to get rid of the city's street artists. We've won a number of federal lawsuits, one of which went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, that say that artists can sell in any park in New York City. They don't need a permit. They don't need permission. What the city's plan is, what their agenda is to privatize all of these public parks, turn them over to corporations. And they find that street artists, because of our First Amendment rights, are an obstacle to this privatization and selling off of the parks. Just to give you an example, if you take the Highline Park, which recently opened, the Parks Department's proposing that only 3 artists will be allowed in a park that's over a mile long. What they don't bother to tell people is that the same park is available to be completely rented for private parties. Recently, Calvin Klein did a product launch up there. He paid the Parks Department $3 million. He had thousands of people up there. So the notion that they want to restrict the number of artists to prevent congestion is ridiculous. If you look in Union Square Park, where artists have been selling for 50, 60 years at least, they want to limit the number of artists to 14. What they don't mention is that they have a green market that's about 150 times the size of those 15 art displays, and they have a holiday market selling knickknacks, clothing, costume jewelry that's also hundreds of times the size of these art displays. Neither of those activities are protected by the First Amendment, but they want to restrict artists to a slight crumb. So this is all part of the privatization agenda of Mike Bloomberg and of Adrian Benebay, both of whom pose publicly as patrons of the arts, as enlightened protectors of freedom of speech, when in reality they are corporate shills that are selling off all the parks in the city. They're putting up apartment houses in parks now. Real estate developers are behind every one of these new park deals that Adrian Benebay is involved in. In fact, all he does all day long is sell off the parks to corporate interests, and he's been after us for years. This is the latest manifestation of it.
So what are the rules, and how far along is the process?
Well, first of all, there's going to be a public hearing on April 23rd at the Chelsea Recreation Center, which is at 430 West 25th Street. The artist group's going to do a protest at 10 a.m. At 11 a.m., you have the public hearing. Anybody can either testify in person or submit written comments. And those written comments will all be available to the public and be part of the public record. The artist group is going to defy all of these new rules in every single park. We'll continue to sell there. We'll protest. If we get arrested, that's what will happen, but we already have lawyers working on a lawsuit to stop these new rules.
And tell me about these rules. What you mentioned that, for instance, the Highline Park would limit the area to 3 artists, but
Correct.
Is it a first-come, first-serve, or do they have to get a permit? How are they proposing the system would work?
Because of the lawsuits that we've won, they're not even going to try to make a permit initially. But when you have 3 spots in a park where artists can set up, and it's on a first-come, first-served basis, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to envision the kind of conflict there would be for those 3 spots. So what the agenda of the Parks Department really is a concession system based on bidding, which is the way they do it for all other vendors in parks. For example, every vendor you see in a park now, except artists, is a minimum wage employee of one or another corporation. Those corporations bid as much as $1 million for a single vending spot to sell hot dogs or souvenirs. And that's the system that the city wants to put artists under, ultimately, with this.
What would be the impact if artists couldn't sell their work on the street?
Obviously, all of your listeners don't have to be told that we're in a terrible financial crisis right now. So even people that normally were doing quite well are not. The idea of the starving artist, it's not just a stereotype. Even in good times, most artists are struggling, and in these times, artists are literally close to starving. So to throw hundreds of artists out of city parks where they've been selling for years with no problem is going to create a tremendous financial dislocation for the city's artists. It's going to be devastating for them. And the irony, again, is that, Mike Bloomberg is one of the biggest art collectors probably in the world, the richest man in New York, does so many events where he's promoting his image as an art patron, and then secretly behind the scenes, he's trying to screw all of the city's artists out of their First Amendment rights. It's not fair and it's not right.
Robert Lederman is the president of Artist. The public hearing is on April 23rd at the Chelsea Recreation Centre at 430 West 25th Street, New York, at 11 a.m. He spoke to WBAI's Evening News.